Hi everybody, no plants today. Unfortunately, this is a personal update. This is why I've not made any videos or content for, I think it's getting on for 5 weeks now. It might be of interest to people who are over a certain age and maybe struggling with health problems, who might be able to relate to my range of emotions and or want to see what the lessons that I've learned from my latest health crisis. So if that's you and you can give the plants a miss for today, you can see them of course, but if you want to hear all the gory details and the lessons that I've learned from it, then keep watching. Okay, so let's go through the whole sorry tale. Very quick, brief recap of my last 11 years abdominal problems. So 2013, bowel blockage due to something that I was born with, resulting in a bowel resection. 2016, another bowel blockage as a result of the adhesions that came from the first operation or scar tissue. 2022, another one. So as you can see, what happens is once you've had abdominal surgery, if you're prone to it and you get these adhesions, this scar tissue, over time they can get thicker and thicker and you can continually get blockage after blockage after blockage, and that's where I am at. So that's the quick recap. So what's happened this time? Well, we're fast forwarding to the present day and I am currently around 17 months since my last bowel blockage surgery. So picture the day, I do a day's work as a gardener, I come home, I have my evening meal and then the pain starts. Now straight away I knew it was another bowel blockage. I've had so many bowel blockages, I know exactly what it feels like, and I'll be honest, at this point I kind of crumbled a little bit. No British stiff upper lip this time. All I could see ahead in my lowest moments of severe pain was another full abdominal surgery and all the pain that entails, along with another year of rehab to get back to full health. And maybe this time it wouldn't just be removal of adhesions, maybe this time it may be another resection or it might be a stoma bag. And I knew it was for sure going to be another trip to A&E, so we duly went off to A&E, which was not a pleasant trip, let me tell you. So let me tell you what happens when you actually get a bowel blockage and what the symptoms are and why the pain and the pressure continually increase over time. So whatever the reason for this blockage, you can imagine, just like any plumbing, if you stop at some point whatever is moving through it, this tube, this pipe, and you keep continually adding stuff to it, you can imagine what happens. Now, it's not the case that you get a bowel blockage and you keep eating. What happens is your abdominal cavity continues to produce and secrete all the different enzymes and liquids and acids and so on and so forth. So what happens is wherever in your intestine the blockage is, you've got the food on top of that, and then you've got this continually added material building up and building up, and that's what happens, and that's the pressure. That's the pain. Now eventually it gets to the point where it reaches the valves that aren't supposed to go in the other direction, but it forces its way through, and again that's the pain. It might be a little bit too much detail for some people, but I want to kind of explain as to why I thought what I thought. So you can perhaps see why the thoughts of going through all this yet again weren't really filling me with joy, so I wasn't really very happy. I thought it would only be a matter of time before my poor innards eventually ruptured, because this is always a risk and this is a very life-threatening scenario if this happens. So this is why an intervention with an NG tube, which we'll come to in a minute, is really important. But this time round, as opposed to the first time not the first time, but the last operation in 2022, this time we were only actually in A&E for about an hour. Why? As opposed to the 17 hours in 2022. Why? Well, because I passed out through the pain. And this was in the waiting room, which frankly was actually the best thing I could have done because it moved me to the front of the queue. Now, it just so happened that a wonderful doctor who was merely walking through the waiting room at the time took charge and whisked me off into one of these bays, which is like a holding area before being admitted to the hospital wards. Now, back in 2022, I'd had all sorts of trouble convincing the staff that I was in the middle of a blocked bowel. I apparently didn't have all the symptoms that you normally get. Now, that was up until the point, this is back in 2022, that I vomited up the contents of my intestines. Now, this is not ordinary vomiting, I have to point out. Again, if you're having your tea, just put it on pause for a second. So for this to happen, the contents of your intestines have to move upwards against the direction of those valves, which normally only go in the, in one direction. And it's every bit as unpleasant and painful as you'd expect. But the delay in recognising it as a bowel blockage caused me hours and hours of unnecessary pain, and of course putting me at risk of that bowel rupture. So this time I was all the more determined not to let that happen again. I insisted on having an NG tube fitted. So this goes up the nose, down the back of the throat and into the stomach, and this all happens while you're awake. Now again, this isn't something you'd happily ask for. It's hugely unpleasant and the body does all it can to actually resist it. But if the result is a decrease in pain, then you ask for it, don't you? So we will fast forward through the actual fitting of this thing. Once it was in place, nothing came out, which surprised me as much as it surprised the medical staff. So they pulled it out a little bit, reinserted it, terrific, twisted it around a bit, even better, but still nothing. Now at this point I had no idea what was going on. Pain, really weird analogy here, but pain is like sex. Well, you know, when you're in the throes of passion and you have nothing else on your mind, you're just 100% focused on what you're doing and the person that you are doing it with. But pain is very similar actually. It's all consuming, nothing else matters. If you've got enough pain, you are just fully zoomed in on the sensation of that pain to the exclusion of everything else. You are laser focused if it's severe enough. So we're getting to the climax of the story anyway, about the lessons learned, and I'm going to speed it up a bit, I promise you. So I eventually had a scan. Don't know what kind of scan it was, but it showed that I didn't actually have a bowel blockage. How come? Well, I actually had 2 gallstones lodged in various places. One of them was in a bile duct, which was causing the swelling, and obviously I was passing this gallstone through a tube which doesn't really want a big stone to be passed through it. So you could say it was a blockage, I was right in that sense, but it wasn't a bowel blockage. But honestly, it felt absolutely identical in every way. Certainly at the time, maybe not looking back, but I'll come to that in a minute. So I spent 2 days in hospital once this thing had passed, and then 5 days on a virtual ward. This is a new thing. What they do is they give you this thing, this armband, and they give you a blood pressure cuff and various things, and they monitor all your vital statistics over from a ward somewhere in the hospital. And the only intervention up until now has been to tell me to change my diet to a low-fat diet. Apparently, once gallstones have navigated the bile duct, they drop into the much larger intestines and are excreted naturally without any pain. So it appears that many of my digestive symptoms and issues over the last 6 months have actually been down to not recovery from the last surgery as I'd thought, or new adhesions as I'd thought, but down to these gallstones. Now the gallbladder, as I've just recently found out, squirts these enzymes onto the fatty foods that you consume. And obviously the more fatty foods you eat, then the more it's going to actually contract and do its job. And the more work it has to do, then the more likely you are to develop gallstones. Now I'm certain it's not as simple as that actually, but you get the general picture. For someone prone to them, like I apparently am, eating food high in fat isn't a great idea. Now, I didn't obviously know any of this at the time. It wasn't even on my radar. I eat a reasonably high fat diet because I have a manual job, and as you can see, I am not overweight. So I need the calories, otherwise you wouldn't see me if I stood side on. I'd already lost weight up to that point just from doing gardening for 2 weeks, and since I've been on this low fat diet for a couple of weeks, I've lost 4 kilos already. So you can see why I included high fat foods in my diet. And the current situation is I am waiting to go to hospital in a couple of hours actually to have the results of my bloods looked at, and I've got a scan tomorrow, and then I'll either be given the all clear or they will decide to remove my gallbladder based on how I feel, I'm thinking they're going to leave me and just say, we'll monitor and leave it at that. So let's get on to the lessons learned. Can there be lessons learned from such a sorry tale? Well, yes, I think so. I've got 5 of them, so let's go through them. The first one is that doctors and surgeons and all medical staff have a really tough job. I'm sure you don't really need me to tell you that, but patients don't just slot into nice, neat categories of symptoms, which would make diagnosing an illness very, very difficult and complex. And yes, there is a whole lot of knowledge needed, but also, I think, an element of trial and error, and yes, luck. It would be great if you could say disease X has these 6 symptoms in every single person that it affects, but it's just not like that. We saw that with COVID, didn't we? Then add into that the pressure of helping someone who's currently in severe pain, and you get some idea of the kind of pressure that they're up against. This time, as opposed to in 2022, I feel like I was lucky. I had really good care from Tim, my nurse, Alex, the doctor, and Miss Mackenzie, my surgeon, who, to be honest, I've practically deified in my own mind. This woman is brilliant. These people are the true professionals who know their jobs inside out and back to front. I actually fit none of the criteria for someone who might develop gallstones other than the fact that I'm getting older. I'm not overweight, I'm not sedentary, I don't have diabetes, I eat a relatively healthy diet, and I exercise. It's little wonder diagnosis is tricky, to say the least. So lesson number 2, it's tough to think of another moment in my life when a situation has apparently done a full 180-degree turn in such a short time. I went from the prospect of another full surgery, another full abdominal surgery, and all that that entails for the whole year afterwards. The possibilities of a bowel resection, a stoma bag, prospect of a completely changed life, to going back home with nothing more than a tender abdomen and an armband and a low-fat diet sheet. The lesson for me, I think, is not to give up hope when all seems lost, which I have to say, at one point, I really had done. I think during the severest of the pain, if I could have taken a pill to end it all, I seriously would have. Now look, I'm not given to drama, I'm not given to pessimism normally, I'm generally a hopeful person, but I can guarantee that pain can do that to anyone and everyone. It just comes down to what your thresholds are. Maybe mine aren't that high, I don't know. So lesson number 3, try to step outside of yourself. This is what I'm trying to do here, and see things from outside looking in. I think this is good advice in everyday life, but in this case, if I'd have been able to do this, then perhaps I would have considered that it might be another issue altogether, as opposed to what I was laser focused on. In other words, it's a bowel blockage. But you see, that's all I knew. I'd never considered for 1 minute that it could have been something completely different. It was painful nonetheless, and looking back, I can see the slight differences now, but at the time, I just had that one-track mind. I don't want it to burst, and I don't want to go through what I went through last time. And really, it would have been useful for me to try and think a bit more carefully about it. Of course, when you're in pain, you don't, do you? So lesson number 4, sometimes good can come from bad. So after all of this, I kind of find myself thinking that actually this outcome could be the best outcome I could have hoped for. Maybe my adhesions aren't actually getting worse as I'd thought over the last 12 months. Maybe I can now manage my digestive issues better because I know what's causing it. Maybe sticking to a low-fat diet is a good thing because I can now increase the protein, which is proven to keep more muscle mass and strength as you age. So there are some good outcomes here. And the last lesson that I thought about was that life can actually strike you down at a moment's notice, and it can raise you back up again in just a shorter time. A lesson, I think, to everyone to be more present, as we all know. And I've thought about that many, many times in the past, and seemingly I can't learn the lesson, and I keep getting the reminder every so often. So maybe this time it'll stick. So there is the full sorry tale, and I hope at least some folks have stuck through till the end. I realise it's not for everybody and it's not about plants. For me, it's kind of like a cathartic exercise, I think, because honestly, I actually feel pretty traumatised by the whole thing, and each time I have and go through something like this, I don't think I'm getting used to it. I think I get worse each time. Each time I hope it'll be the last, but of course it probably won't be, because, you know, I'm not getting any younger, and well, none of us are we? And of course we're not going to get any healthier either if we're already at the, you know, we're doing our best in terms of exercise, diet and so on. But I don't want to end it on a depressing note, so I'll ask for some input from you. The last time I made a video like this in 2022, I got all sorts of comments about what people have been through themselves and how they really did resonate with some aspects of my story. So I would like you to tell me again in the comments, and I'm sure lots of you are worse off than I am and would wish for my health problems. And maybe you're coping much better than I am too. So what I want you to do is tell me your story, tell me any lessons you've learned from it, and it'll make great reading, not just for me, but for anybody else who wants to dive into the comments and see what people are struggling with. Surprisingly, or maybe not surprisingly, people who are into plants tend to be an unhealthy lot. I don't know whether that's maybe because we tend to be more older folk who are into plants. I know there are lots of young people too, but maybe not as many. So that's it anyway. I hope the next one will be about the plants, because I've not showed you what's going on in here for quite a while. I've got lots of new ones, and I will make my next video all about plants, I promise. And hopefully I will be back to full fitness by then. I'll see you on the next one. Bye.